Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're plunging into Prohibition-era St. Louis, specifically the Hogan Gang.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. We've got some really detailed historical documentation to work from.
Right, stuff about their origins, their activities, the whole picture.
Exactly. Who they were, what they did, their rivals, especially their rivals.
And our mission here, for you listening, is basically to unpack all that, to give you a clear understanding of this one specific gang, Egan's Rats,
Yeah.
sorry, the Hogan Gang, and their place in that whole Prohibition mess.
That's right. Think of it as getting the core story, their rise, their big feud with Egan's Rats, and, well, what happened to them in the end. It really captures that era of ambition and violence fueled by the booze ban.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. The sources say the Hogan Gang pops up around 1917 in St. Louis.
St. Louis, Missouri. And the main guy, the founder, was Edward Hogan. Jelly Roll Hogan.
Jelly Roll. Okay, that nickname, it doesn't exactly scream gangster, does it? Where did that come from?
Well, it was pretty straightforward, actually. Just referred to his hefty build.
Ah,
But don't let the name fool you. He was a significant figure even before the gang really took off. Owned a saloon.
right.
And interestingly, he was also involved in the Missouri state legislature.
Wait, a lawmaker? Seriously, who then becomes a gang leader? That's quite a career path.
It is, isn't it?
Man.
And apparently, he was pretty effective as a legislator, described as garrulous, persuasive.
I sense a butt coming.
Well, yeah, he also had a temper. There's this incident on record where he and an associate actually assaulted another legislator, a guy named Ben Neal, right there at the state capitol.
Okay, so he wasn't exactly shy about using force, even back then.
Seems not. So you have this figure, already connected, already kind of aggressive.
And then Prohibition hits. Suddenly, selling booze is illegal, but hugely profitable.
Exactly. A perfect storm, you could say. He clearly saw an opportunity.
So what were the Hogan Gang's main rackets? Obviously, illegal liquor.
Oh, yeah, that was the bread and butter. Bootlegging. But they weren't just a one-trick pony.
Okay.
The sources mention labor slugging, using muscle in union dispute, voter intimidation too, armed robbery, and, murder. It was a full-service operation, unfortunately.
Covering all the bases of organized crime at the time, and they operated primarily in St. Louis. Did they have a specific turf?
Definitely St. Louis. And, yeah, their headquarters, kind of their home base, was Hogan's own saloon, corner of Cass and Jefferson Avenues.
Right in the thick of it. So who was in this gang? More than just Jelly Roll, I assume?
Oh, for sure. By about 1923, estimates put them at maybe 100, 150 members.
Wow, that's a decent size.
Yeah. And interestingly, while it was predominantly Irish-American, like Hogan himself, they weren't exclusively Irish. They had Italian members,
Yeah.
Jewish members. Big Maxie Greenberg is mentioned as a key Jewish member.
Huh. That's interesting. Not always the case with ethnic gangs back then.
No, it wasn't. Suggests maybe a pragmatic approach, Skills over heritage, perhaps. We see names like James Hogan, Jelly Roll's brother, Humbert Costello, Leo Casey, John Kink Connell, Patrick Scanlon, clearly Irish. But then Charles Mercurio pops up, sounds Italian, and Abe Goldfeder, Jewish.
So, Miss Crew, any other key players? The
Yeah.
specialists?
They apparently had a top marksman, a guy named Luke Kennedy, someone you really didn't want aiming at you,
I bet.
and Jelly Roll Hogan himself. This is wild. Besides leading the gang, he was also a deputy inspector for the State Beverage Department of Missouri.
Get out! A state beverage inspector while running a bootlegging operation.
Yep. Think about the advantage that gives you. Inside info on raids, maybe influencing enforcement, using his badge against rivals.
That's incredible. Talk about blurred lines between the law and the criminals.
It really sums up the era, doesn't it? That kind of blatant conflict of interest, that level of influence.
Okay, so he's got this official cover, this growing gang. They weren't alone in St. Louis, right? Who are their friends and enemies?
Right. They had allies. The Cuckoo Gang, the Russo Gang. Sources say they had a particularly close business thing going with the Russos.
Again, crossing ethnic lines there with the Russo gang.
Yeah, which, as we said, wasn't always the norm elsewhere. But their main problem, their biggest rivals, were another Irish gang, Egan's Rats.
Egan's Rats. Even the name sounds tough. What was the beef between the Hogans and the Rats?
It was kind of twofold. First, politics. Jelly Roll Hogan and William Egan, the leader of the Rats, were Democratic rivals. They apparently clashed quite a bit, even physically, like in the state capitol building.
So bad blood already existed before Prohibition really heated up?
Seems so. And then you add the massive profits from illegal booze, competition over who controlled which territory just exploded. Things really escalated into open warfare in the winter of 1921.
Politics and profit, a dangerous mix. So what was the spark? What actually set off the Egan-Hogan War?
The trigger seems to have been an Egan gangster named Max Greenberg, the same Big Maxie we mentioned earlier.
Ah, okay. What happened with him?
Apparently, Willie Egan accused him of cheating on a whiskey deal. There was an attempt on Greenberg's life, which failed. So Greenberg switches sides and joins the Hogan gang.
Okay, that would definitely stir things up.
But then the rumors started. Word was that Greenberg actually paid some Hogan guys to take out Willie Egan.
Wow. Paid for a hit on his old boss? Did it happen?
Tragically, yes. Willie Egan was gunned down outside his saloon in October 1921.
And did they know who did it?
Well, according to another Egan gangster, Dint Colbeck, who was there, Egan named names just before he died. He supposedly pointed the finger at James Hogan Jelly Roll's brother, Luke Kennedy, the marksman, and another guy named John Doyle.
Okay, so now it's undeniable. An open war. How bad did the violence get?
It got brutal, really brutal. Lots of gunfights, and innocent people were definitely caught in the crossfire. It wasn't contained at all.
Any specific examples jump out from the sources?
Yeah, quite a few. Like James Hogan, Luke Kennedy, Abe Goldfeder, and their lawyer, a guy named Jacob Mackler, were ambushed coming out of police headquarters.
Yeah.
Kennedy was badly wounded. Mackler somehow walked away fine.
Ambushed leaving the police station. Bold.
Very. And just a week later, John Doyle, one of the guys Egan supposedly named, he was shot and killed by police after a chase.
So the body count started rising fast. It sounds like the Hogans took some early hits. Luke Kennedy was targeted again, wasn't he?
He was. While he was still recovering from that first ambush, he was caught again and killed in a place called Wellston.
Rough.
Yeah, and there's a grim detail from an informant later claiming the killers actually taunted him before they shot him. These weren't just random shootings. They were targeted hits, taking out key people, lawyers, trying to dismantle the rival gang.
So how did the Hogans hit back? It couldn't have been one-sided.
Oh, no. They retaliated. They shot up Dink Colbeck's plumbing store that was his legitimate business front. And the very next day, Egan's crew drove by Jelly Roll Hogan's house and sprayed it with bullets. His parents had to dive for cover.
Jeez. It's just back and forth, escalating constantly. The public must have been terrified.
Absolutely. Imagine living with that going on. You get a real sense of the accounts, just how chaotic and, frankly, lawless things felt in St. Louis then.
Was anyone trying to stop it, besides the police, who seemed kind of caught up in it too?
Well, yes, thankfully. A local Catholic priest, Monsignor Timothy Dempsey, he actually stepped in.
A priest? How did that work?
He held private meetings, talked to both sides, and amazingly, he managed to broker a peace treaty, a temporary one, in June 1922.
A peace treaty? Huh. Any conditions?
Yeah, part of the deal was that Max Greenberg, the guy whose defection sort of started it all, he was escorted out of St. Louis. Hogan's guys took him to New York.
So, peace in our time. Or not quite.
Well, it was fragile. Sources suggest Egan's rats maybe came out slightly ahead in terms of territory from that treaty. And they apparently kept poking the bear, provoking the Hogans.
Ah, so it didn't last.
Nope. The peace was completely shattered in February 1923. Dint Colbeck and his crew ambushed and murdered Jacob Mackler.
The Hogan's lawyer. The one who survived the first ambush.
The very same one. Killing him sent a pretty clear message. A truce was over. Dead over.
That must have set things off again, maybe even worse than before.
Absolutely. The city plunged back into gang war. Hogan's house got shot up again. There was one really bad incident. Hogan and Humbert Costello were in a car chase, shooting back and forth with some Egan members, and their car hit a 12-year-old schoolboy, injured him badly.
Oh, man. That's awful. Just complete chaos. What was Hogan's reaction to being attacked like that?
When the police asked him later if he could identify the guys who shot at him during that chase, his response was apparently just pure rage. He supposedly snarled, "I'll identify them with a shotgun."
Chilling. The whole situation sounds like it was just spiraling, totally out of control. You mentioned public outcry earlier.
Yeah, it reached a boiling point. People were fed up. There was even serious talk about bringing in federal troops to sort out St. Louis.
Wow. Federal troops.
In the end, it seems it was a combination of things. Monsignor Dempsey kept working at it, the police cracked down harder, and a reporter from the St. Louis Star newspaper got involved, pushing for an end.
How did it finally stop?
Colbeck for the Egan side and Jelly Roll Hogan himself both ended up writing letters that were published in the Star, publicly declaring the feud was over.
Just like that? Letters in the paper.
Pretty much the official end, yeah. Although there was apparently one last unsuccessful attempt on James Hogan's life shortly after, just to show maybe not everyone got the memo, but basically the Egan-Hogan War was done.
So after all that violence, who actually came out on top? The Hogans seemed to take some heavy losses during the fighting.
Yeah, it might seem that way, but ironically, in the long run, the Hogan gang survived and even thrived.
Really? What happened to Egan's rats?
They kind of fell apart. Internal fighting, key members getting killed off, and then federal indictments for mail robbery really finished them off.
And the Hogans.
They just kept going. Expanded their territory into South St. Louis County, kept making money from bootlegging right through the rest of Prohibition. Seems they were maybe just better organized, more resilient.
So Jelly Roll Hogan weathered the storm. What happened to him after Prohibition finally ended? Did he stick with crime?
Not entirely, no. This is another surprising turn. He transitioned back into politics.
You're kidding. After leading a notorious gang through a bloody war?
Yep. He actually went on to serve 4 terms in the Missouri State Senate.
4 terms. As a state senator.
He died of natural causes in 1963, age 77. It's quite the life story. Gang boss to respected politician. It really shows how complex that whole period was.
It really does. That's incredible. And the sources mention the gang even popped up in literature. Tennessee Williams.
That's right, and the Glass Menagerie, which just shows, how much their story became part of the city's fabric, part of its history that even playwrights picked up on.
Fascinating. And looking at the bigger picture, how did the Hogans compare to other Irish gangs in, say, New York or Boston?
Well, one interesting point the sources make is their relationship with the local mafia.
Yeah.
It seems the Hogans had relatively decent or at least working relations with them in St. Louis. That wasn't always the case elsewhere, where Irish and Italian gangs were often at each other's throats. So St. Louis had its own unique underworld dynamic.
And underlying all of this, of course, is Prohibition itself. It's impossible to separate the rise of gangs like the Hogans and the violence like the war with Egan's rats from the fact that alcohol was illegal.
Absolutely. Prohibition basically created this massive, incredibly lucrative black market. It fueled organized crime, funded these gangs, gave them something huge to fight over. The Hogan gang story is really a perfect, if brutal, example of that whole national phenomenon playing out locally.
Yeah, it's like a microcosm. All the elements are there. The criminal enterprise, the political connections, the ethnic dimensions, the intense violence, all swirling around because of this one law.
Exactly. Gives us a really sharp view into the realities of Prohibition-era St. Louis, and by extension into organized crime across America at that time.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we've seen the Hogan gang rise up, led by the politically adept Jelly Roll Hogan. We've looked at their operations, their diverse membership.
And that incredibly violent war with Egan's rats.
Yeah.
A real struggle for control.
Right. And the surprising outcome, the Hogans survived, even expanded, while their rivals faded away. Jelly Roll himself ends up back in the Senate. It's quite a narrative.
It really is a compelling and, pretty violent slice of American history.
And thinking about it, all the politics, the money, the personalities, all crashing together in St. Louis. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, it makes you think about other conflicts, maybe smaller ones, less famous ones throughout history. How many other local clashes, driven by their own unique mix of factors, might have had these really significant, long-lasting consequences that maybe we don't fully appreciate today? What ripples are still spreading from forgotten feuds?
That's a really interesting thought to end on. Food for thought, definitely.